I only wanted to listen to music while cooking in our quiet kitchen. Instead, I heard my husband whisper, "I love you," over the speakerphone. The voice that purred back did not belong to a stranger. It belonged to my best friend of 22 years. In that frozen second, my marriage died. They thought they were playing a fool. But they did not realize that tonight, the fool had just started writing the script for their total destruction. My name is Lauren Price, and until 10 minutes ago, I thought I was the luckiest woman in Chicago. I stood in the center of our 42nd floor kitchen, the granite countertop cool against my hips, stirring a pot of marinara sauce that had been simmering for 3 hours. The city lights outside were a blur of gold and obsidian, but inside, it was just the domestic warmth of a Tuesday night. I reached for my husband's phone, which sat on the marble island, intending to switch the track on our shared playlist. That was when the screen lit up. A single letter flashed against the locked background. Eee! I smiled instinctively. It had to be Evie. Evelyn Brooks, my best friend of 22 years, the woman who had held my hand through my mother's funeral and my first miscarriage. She was also the director of employee experience at Novaspan Dynamics, my husband's company. I figured she was calling to vent about some office politics or gossip about the interns. I slid my thumb across the screen to answer, intending to playfully yell that Damon was indisposed. The shower water was thrumming rhythmically in the master bath down the hall. I brought the phone up, ready to speak, but the water suddenly cut off. "Don't hang up. Put it on speaker for me," Damon shouted from the bathroom, his voice echoing slightly against the tile. He sounded urgent, breathless. I paused, my hand hovering over the speaker icon. I pressed it, assuming he was expecting a confirmation on a delivery or a legal update. I set the phone back on the counter, wiping a stray splash of red sauce from my thumb. Then I heard it. The sound that shattered my world was not a shout, but a whisper. "I love you." Damon's voice drifted from the bathroom, softer and more tender than it had been with me in years. "I love you. I swear I'm going to do it right this time. After the initial public offering, I'll clean everything and we can go public." I froze. The wooden spoon slipped from my grip and clattered onto the counter, but the noise was swallowed by the voice that answered him. It was a voice I knew better than my own. "Babe." Evie purred through the speaker, the sound rich with intimacy and a sickening familiarity. "You know I'm impatient. Just make sure it's airtight. She'll never suspect a thing. Lauren trusts me like a sister." My lungs seized. The air in the kitchen suddenly felt too thin to breathe. I stood paralyzed, staring at the device I had bought him for his birthday. Memories flashed like strobe lights the late-night strategy meetings they attended together. The business trips to San Francisco, I was told, were too boring for spouses. The times Evie insisted I stay home so she and I could have girl time later. They were not separate events. They were pieces of a puzzle I had been too stupid to assemble. Footsteps approached from the hallway. Damon walked into the kitchen, a towel wrapped low around his waist, water droplets glistening on his chest. He did not look at the corner where I stood in the shadows of the refrigerator. He looked only at the phone. "My lawyer is drafting the ownership restructure now," Damon said, walking toward the island, treating the woman on the line with a reverence he used to save for me. "By the time I file the papers, she won't hold anything on paper. She'll be lucky to walk away with the car." I pressed myself back against the cold stainless steel of the fridge, making myself small, making myself invisible. Every instinct screamed at me to lunge forward, to scream, to throw the boiling pot of sauce at his chest, but I did not move. "Good," Evie laughed, a cruel, sharp sound that twisted in my gut. "Don't worry. When you finally kick her to the curb, I'll pretend to be shocked for her. I'll bring the tissues." The betrayal was a physical blow, a knife twisting between my ribs. But as Evie's laugh faded, something cold and hard settled over my heart. I did not scream. I did not cry. I stood in the dark, watching the man I married conspire with the sister I chose, and I memorized every single word. They thought they were destroying me, but in the silence of that kitchen, they were only giving me the ammunition I would use to bury them, to understand why the ground beneath my feet felt like it was dissolving into quicksand. You have to understand that Evelyn Brooks was not just a friend. She was my survival map. I first met Evie in a high school art classroom in a small, suffocating town in Iowa. We were the outcasts, the two girls who did not fit the mold of cheerleaders or debate team stars. I was too quiet, and she was too loud, but we bonded over charcoal sketches and the shared misery of being bullied by the football team. I remembered the day we packed my battered Honda Civic immediately after graduation. We made a pact on the hood of that car under a vast, starry sky. "We get out of here, Lauren," she had said, gripping my hand tight enough to bruise. "We go to Chicago, and we never look back. It's you and me against the world. Promise me." "I promise," I had whispered back. We moved into a cramped, drafty apartment in Chicago where the heating rattled and the rent was $400 a month. We survived on instant noodles and stale pastries from the coffee shop where we both worked double shifts to pay for college. It was hard, but it was ours. Then came Damon. I met him in my junior year business ethics class. Back then, he was not the polished CEO in a tailored Italian suit. He was a scholarship student with holes in his sneakers and a hunger in his eyes that terrified most people. But it did not terrify me. I brought him home one evening, nervous about what Evie would think. She was my filter, my protector. She watched him watch me as I sketched out a design on a napkin. Later that night, while we brushed our teeth in our tiny bathroom, she nudged me. "Marry him, Lo," she had said, grinning through a mouthful of toothpaste. "Seriously, he looks at you like you are the entire world. Don't let that one go." We became an inseparable trio. The unbeatable trio, we called ourselves. The blueprint for Novaspan Dynamics was not created in a high-tech boardroom. It was born on a wobbly wooden table in our kitchen, stained with wine rings and cheap pizza grease. I was the creative force, the one who understood user interface and human empathy. Damon was the structural mind, the planner. Evie was the connector, the one who charmed strangers into listening to our pitch. When the company officially launched, I made the first great sacrifice. I dropped out of my interior design program to work full-time for Novaspan for $0 in salary. Damon needed every cent for server costs. Evie kept her stable job at a corporate firm to pay our collective rent. But I was the one grinding out 16-hour days, coding the front end and designing the branding. Our wedding was small, held in my parents' backyard because we could not afford a venue. Evie was my maid of honor. She cried harder than I did. During her toast, she raised a glass of cheap champagne, her mascara running down her cheeks. I vow to protect this family. She had choked out, her voice trembling with emotion. "I love you both so much. Nothing will ever break this circle." But the cracks started when the money arrived. When the first venture capital funding came in, Damon sat me down. He held my hands, his thumbs rubbing my knuckles soothingly. "The investors, they want a clean cap table, babe," he had said, looking pained. "They want a single majority stakeholder. It complicates things if we split the equity 3 ways or even 2 ways right now. It's just for show. You know everything is yours anyway." I hesitated. It felt wrong. I looked at Evie, who had just come on board as our head of HR. "He's right. Lauren," Evie had said, her voice steady and reassuring. "It's standard business practice. Let him take the heat. We do this for the greater good. I'm not taking equity either. See, we trust him." So I signed away my co-founder status. I signed away my intellectual property rights on the assumption that marriage was the ultimate contract. I spent nights entering data and refining the pitch decks Damon used to become a star, while I faded into the background as just the wife. And while I faded, I leaned on Evie. I told her about the negative pregnancy tests. I cried on her shoulder about my terrifying fear that Damon only wanted a legacy and that my inability to give him a child was making him cold. He loves you. Low. She would soothe me, stroking my hair. He's just stressed. Don't worry. I'm here. I'm always here. Standing in my kitchen now, the memory of her comfort felt like poison in my veins. They had used my trust to disarm me. I realized with a sick, cold clarity that the two people I loved most had not just betrayed me. They had built their empire on the bricks I carried for them, and now they were using those same bricks to crush me. The silence in the kitchen was deafening, but I forced my face into a mask of oblivion. I walked down the hallway to the master bedroom where Damon was drying off, and I held the phone out to him with a smile that felt like it was cracking my skin. "Here you go," I said, keeping my voice steady. "It sounds like Evie is having a crisis with the interns again. You should probably talk to her." Damon looked at me, searching for any sign of a crack in the facade. When he saw only my usual helpfulness, his shoulders relaxed. He took the phone, muttered a quick thanks, and retreated into the walk-in closet to take the call in private. I stood there, listening to the muffled murmur of his voice, and I felt the last remnant of my love for him turn into cold, hard ash. That night, while Damon snored beside me, I did not sleep. I sat on the floor of the guest bathroom with the door locked, a notepad balanced on my knees. I wrote down everything. I recorded the exact time, 8:42 in the evening. I transcribed every word I had heard over the speakerphone. I wrote down the tone of Evie's voice. It was no longer a diary. It was an affidavit. The next morning, after Damon left for the office, I entered his home workspace. He was arrogant, so his password was still the street name of the first house we lived in. I bypassed his main dashboard and went straight to the hidden folders nested deep within the system drives. I found a folder innocuous labeled Tax Old. Inside, there was a document titled Marital Restructuring Agreement. I opened it and felt the blood drain from my face. It was a draft prepared by a high-profile divorce attorney. The terms were brutal. It painted me as a dependent spouse who had contributed nothing to the company's success. It outlined a settlement that would leave me with zero equity and no voting rights. But the email attached to the folder was worse. It was from Evie. Damon. She had written, "We need to start planting the seeds now. Tell the board she is emotionally unstable. Mention that she has been having episodes since the last failed IVF cycle. If we frame her as mentally fragile, we can push her out of the founder's circle completely before the IPO. I will corroborate everything." My hand hovered over the keyboard. My first instinct was to delete everything, to smash the computer, to burn the house down. Instead, I took a deep breath. I opened a private cloud storage account I had used back in college, one Damon did not know existed. I uploaded every file, every email, every draft. I took screenshots of the metadata showing when the documents were created. I was not just a wife anymore. I was a witness, building a case. 2 days later, I decided to test the waters. I met Evie for lunch near the Novaspan headquarters. She hugged me tight, smelling of the expensive perfume I had bought her for Christmas. "I was thinking," I said, picking at my salad, watching her eyes. "Now that I am feeling better, maybe I could come back to the product team. I have some ideas for the user interface update." Evie reached across the table and patted my hand, her expression dripping with a pity that made me want to vomit. "Oh, honey," she said, tilting her head. "You don't need that stress. You know how intense it is right now. Just enjoy your life. Be the rich wife. Why would you want to crawl back into the trenches with us boring workers? You are too fragile for this crunch time." I smiled back at her. "You are right. I should just focus on the house." "Exactly." She beamed. For the next 2 weeks, I played the part perfectly. When Damon came home late, smelling of wine and another woman's perfume, he told me he had been at investor meetings. I fixed his tie and told him he worked too hard. But inside, I was tracking him. I matched his meetings against credit card charges I found on a statement he thought was paperless. On a rainy Thursday, I saw the location on his shared Tesla app. He had disabled it on his phone, but he forgot the iPad linked to the car account. It showed the vehicle parked at the Riverside Boutique Hotel. I drove there in my old sedan. I parked across the street and waited. At 11 at night, they walked out. They were holding hands. Under the golden glow of the hotel awning, Evie pulled him down by the lapels of his coat and kissed him. It was possessive. It was a kiss of ownership. I watched them through the windshield, the wipers' rhythmic beat-marking time. I did not cry. I simply took a photo with my telephoto lens. They thought they were discarding a foolish, weak woman. They did not know they had just created their worst enemy. I drove home and slipped back into bed before Damon returned. When he finally slid in beside me, smelling of rain and betrayal, I stared up at the dark ceiling. "If they think I am stupid," I whispered silently to the shadows, "then I will use their own arrogance to dig their graves." The meeting with the divorce attorney was brief and brutal. I sat in a leather chair in a quiet office 3 blocks from our penthouse, listening to a man named Mr. Henderson dismantle my hope. He pushed a stack of papers across the desk, his expression grim. "Lauren, I have looked at the filings," he said, removing his glasses. "Damon has been very thorough. On paper, you are a housewife with no assets. The prenuptial agreement was amended 3 years ago when you signed those tax documents without reading them. If we go to court now, you walk away with a small stipend for 2 years. That is it." I felt the room spin, but I built it. I wrote the code. "Can you prove it?" he asked gently. "Because his legal team has terabytes of data saying otherwise. We can drag this out, but you will run out of energy long before he runs out of money." I left his office knowing that I could not win a war on a battlefield Damon had designed. I needed a new map. That weekend, while clearing out boxes from my late mother's storage unit, my fingers brushed against cold metal. It was a brass key attached to a faded tag that read Maple Ridge. It belonged to the cabin of my Aunt Alice, a brilliant data scientist who had passed away 5 years ago. She had left the cabin to my mother, and then it had passed to me, forgotten in the chaos of my marriage. I needed to disappear. That evening, I told Damon. I stood in the doorway of his study, watching him pretend to work. "I need some time," I said, feigning a tremor in my voice. "The fertility treatments, the stress. I just need to go away for a few weeks, to think about us, about babies." The relief that washed over his face was insulting. He did not even try to hide it. He practically leaped from his chair to pull up his travel app. "That is a great idea, babe," he said, too quickly. "Go. Take all the time you need. Clear your head." He booked me a first-class ticket to Denver within 10 minutes. He thought he was sending a broken woman away so he could finalize his affair in peace. He did not know he was sending me to the armory. The drive from Denver International Airport to Maple Ridge was a transition between worlds. I traded the gray steel skyline of Chicago for the jagged, imposing silence of the Rocky Mountains. As my rental SUV climbed higher, the air grew thin and sharp, smelling of pine needles and snow. By the time I turned onto the dirt road leading to the cabin, the noise of the city felt like a bad dream. Aunt Alice's cabin was exactly as I remembered it from childhood summers. It was dusty, smelling of old paper and cedar wood. I spent the first night sweeping floors and sneezing, surrounded by shelves packed with her old notebooks and sketches. Alice had been a force of nature unmarried, fiercely independent, and terrifyingly smart. The next afternoon, while wiping down a heavy oak desk in the loft, I found a drawer that was locked. The brass key on my ring fit perfectly. Inside, there was a single, thick manila envelope with my name written in Alice's spidery handwriting. Underneath my name, it read, "Open only when you are truly alone." A shiver ran down my spine. I sat on the floor, the wooden planks hard beneath me, and tore open the seal. The letter was dated 6 months before she died. My dearest Lauren, it began. If you are reading this, it means the world has finally disappointed you enough to make you look for answers. Do you remember that summer you interned for me, the Health Data Project? You wrote the core predictive algorithm. We filed the patent together. My heart hammered against my ribs. I turned the page. I knew Damon was ambitious. The letter continued. So, I made sure the intellectual property for the core analysis engine, the engine that runs NovaSpan, was never transferred to him. It is registered to you, Lauren. Exclusively, I gasped, my hands trembling as I pulled out the other documents in the envelope. There was a copy of a trust deed, the Alice and Nora Legacy Fund. Your mother and I set this up. The letter read, "We knew you give your heart too freely. So, this trust was designed to sleep. As long as you were happily married, it remained inactive. But the moment you file for divorce or are displaced from your marital home, the trust activates. It contains the patent rights and a portfolio of early-stage stocks I bought in your name, including a silent majority stake in the Series A round of NovaSpan." I stared at the numbers at the bottom of the statement. The total value of the assets was over $4,800,000, but the money was not the point. The point was the patent number listed in bold ink. Damon had built his entire empire, his upcoming initial public offering, and his reputation on a technology that he did not own. He thought he had kicked a penniless housewife out of his life. He had no idea he had just evicted the landlord. The sign above the door read Harper & Cole in peeling gold leaf. It was the only law office in Maple Ridge, sandwiched between a bakery and a hardware store. Inside, the air smelled of stale coffee and old law books, a sharp contrast to the sterile, lemon-scented air of the corporate firms in Chicago. I sat across from Elias Harper, a man with wild gray hair and suspenders, as he adjusted his spectacles and peered at the documents I had pulled from Aunt Alice's envelope. He had been silent for 20 minutes. Finally. He looked up, his eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and delight. "Mrs. Price," he began, tapping a thick finger on the patent registration. "Do you have any idea what you are holding here? I think so," I said, my hands clasped tightly in my lap to stop them from shaking. "But I need you to tell me if it holds up." "Holds up." Harper laughed, a dry, rasping sound. "This is ironclad. The core algorithm, the predictive health modeling engine that NovaSpan is built on, is registered solely to you. It was never assigned to the company. Legally speaking, every time your husband runs that software, he is infringing on your intellectual property. If investors knew the company didn't own its own flagship product, the stock would be worthless by lunch." I felt a strange buzzing in my ears. For years, Damon had told me I was useless, just a decoration in his grand life. Yet here was proof that I was the foundation. Harper flipped to the next document, the trust deed. "And then there is this," he said, shaking his head. "The Alice and Nora Legacy Fund. The current valuation is roughly $4,800,000. But the interesting part is the portfolio composition. Your aunt bought into NovaSpan during the seed round. Through this trust, you are one of the largest individual shareholders in the company. Your husband doesn't know." "No," I whispered, the realization settling over me like a heavy blanket. "He thinks he pushed me out. He thinks he erased me." "Well," Harper leaned back, steepling his fingers. "You have options. We could file a cease and desist order tomorrow. We could shut down his operations, sue for damages, and report the omission of ownership to the Securities and Exchange Commission. It would be a bloodbath." I looked out the window where snow was starting to fall on the quiet street. A quick lawsuit would give me money. It would stop the pain, but it would allow Damon to spin the narrative. He would paint himself as the victim of a vindictive ex-wife. He would still be the genius, just a persecuted one. "No," I said, my voice hardening. I don't want a settlement. I want the truth to matter. He built his reputation on being a self-made genius. If I sue him now, he keeps that image. I want him to lose the one thing he loves more than money. Harper studied me over the rim of his glasses. A slow smile spread across his face. You want his legacy, he said. If that is the case, we don't strike yet. We wait. We let him climb higher so the fall is fatal. We need to document that he is knowingly lying to investors. We build a case not just for theft, but for securities fraud. We spent the next hour mapping out a strategy. I left his office feeling lighter than I had in years. Over the next few weeks, I settled into a rhythm that felt like healing. I rented a small, drafty studio space next to an old mechanic shop and bought 50 pounds of clay. For the first time since college, I let my hands get dirty. I threw pots and sculpted figures, letting the physical exertion drain the anger from my body. I started online therapy, talking to a woman in Denver who told me that my worth was not defined by my husband's validation. Slowly, the Lauren who had cowered in the kitchen began to disappear. In her place, a woman with clay under her fingernails and a legal arsenal in her back pocket began to emerge. One evening, I stood on the porch of the cabin, wrapped in a thick wool blanket, looking down at the twinkling lights of the town in the valley. The air was crisp and clean. I thought of Damon back in Chicago, probably toasting champagne with Evie, thinking he had successfully discarded the dead weight. Damon thinks he abandoned a penniless wife. I whispered to the cold wind, watching my breath plume in the moonlight. It's funny. He just kicked out his biggest shareholder. From the quiet isolation of my cabin in Maple Ridge, I watched the world applaud my executioners. My laptop screen was a window into a reality that felt increasingly like a hallucination. The financial news channels were breathless, running segments on the upcoming initial public offering of Novaspan Dynamics. They called Damon the Midwest's tech messiah and praised his journey from a scholarship student to a billionaire in waiting. I scrolled through the articles, my coffee going cold in the mountain air. Every interview failed to mention me. I had been scrubbed from the narrative as effectively as a stain on a silk shirt. Then I made the mistake of checking the company Instagram account. There was Evie, posing in the center of the open plan office I had designed, wearing a pristine white blazer. She was captioned as the soul of Novaspan and the chief culture officer, underneath a photo of her toasting with champagne. She had written, "True success is building a family that sticks together no matter what." I felt bile rise in my throat. I closed the tab before I threw the computer against the log wall. My phone buzzed with a notification from Signal, an encrypted messaging app I had installed the day before. The sender ID was a random string of numbers, but I knew who it was. Miguel, a brilliant young programmer I had hired straight out of a boot camp 3 years ago, had finally reached out. "Lauren, it is Miguel." The message read, "I cannot stay silent anymore. They are cooking the books. The daily active user count is inflated by 30%. Damon ordered the engineering lead to write a script that counts background refreshes as user logins." My fingers flew across the keyboard. "Do you have proof?" "Yes," he replied instantly. "But I am scared. Evie, she has turned this place into a prison. She calls them team-building retreats, but they are interrogation sessions. Last week, she made us sign new non-disclosure agreements. She told us that if we leaked anything before the IPO, she would ensure we never worked in tech again. She said, 'I will bury your reputation so deep you won't even get hired to fix a printer.'" I called Elias Harper immediately. We put Miguel on a secure line. "Miguel, listen to me," Harper said, his voice calm and authoritative through the speaker. "You are not a leaker. You are a whistleblower. There are federal laws that protect you if you go to the Securities and Exchange Commission. We will guide you. You document everything, and they cannot touch you." While Harper handled the legal shielding for Miguel, I dug deeper into the administrative back end of Novaspan, I still had a backdoor access key to the HR system that Evie had forgotten to revoke, mostly because she did not know I had written the code for it. What I found made my blood run cold. Evie had not just erased me, she had rewritten history. My employee file had been retroactively altered. Instead of co-founder or head of product, my title was listed as junior consultant. The reason for departure was updated 2 weeks ago, terminated for consistent poor performance and emotional instability. She was planting the landmines already, ensuring that if I ever spoke up, I would look like a bitter, incompetent ex-employee. A new file popped up in my chat with Miguel. It was an audio recording. I hacked into the conference room mic during the prospectus review. Miguel wrote. I pressed play. The audio was grainy, but the voices were unmistakable. We need to be careful with the wording on the intellectual property section. Damon said. I could hear the clink of glass. Likely whiskey. The algorithm needs to be listed as internally developed proprietary assets. Do not mention the original patent filing. Don't worry, babe. Evie's voice chimed in, dismissive and arrogant. Nobody looks at the patent registry for a software company. By the time anyone notices, we will have the IPO money. Once we have that $200 million in the bank, we can hire a team of lawyers to bury her if she tries to claim anything. She is broke. She can't fight a war against a war chest like that. I paused the recording. The silence in the cabin was heavy. You are right, Damon, I said to the empty room. I can't fight a war chest like that. I realized then that timing was everything. If I sued them now, they might settle quietly or delay the IPO to fix the paperwork. They would survive, but if I let them proceed, if I let them stand on the precipice of massive wealth, they would be vulnerable. I called Harper and a securities litigator he had recommended in Denver. We don't stop the IPO today, I told them, my voice steady. We let them walk right up to the edge. The Vision Night Gala is in 3 days. Every major investor, the press, and the SEC regulators will be in that ballroom. That is risky. Lauren, the Denver lawyer warned. If they ring the opening bell the next morning, undoing it becomes a nightmare. They won't ring the bell, I said, looking at the snow falling outside the window. I am going to crash the party, and I am not just bringing a lawsuit, I am bringing the truth. I approached Sterling and Finch, a mid-sized investment fund that my Aunt Alice had trusted for decades, not as a grieving wife, but as a business opportunity. I sat in their glass-walled conference room in Denver, sliding the patent documents and the trust deed across the mahogany table. I watched the senior partner, a man named Marcus with eyes like a hawk, read the papers. I told him I did not want charity. I offered him a chance to acquire the core intellectual property of the Midwest's hottest tech company for pennies on the dollar, provided they helped me expose the fraud. Marcus looked at the documents, then at me. Mrs. Price, he said, a slow grin spreading across his face. If these documents are authentic, Novaspan is currently selling a car they do not have the title to. We are in. We will send a proxy to the roadshow to ask the difficult questions. With the financial flank covered, I turned to the media. I used an encrypted email to contact Sarah Jenkins, a financial journalist notorious for tearing apart inflated startups. I sent her a digital dossier containing the altered user metrics and the proof of ownership. My only condition was the timing. I told her to publish the exposé exactly at 8 in the evening on the night of the gala, right when Damon would be taking the stage. As I dug deeper into the data Miguel continued to feed me, I found a betrayal that cut deeper than the affair. In an archived folder of Evie's old emails, I found a correspondence from 5 years ago. I had applied to a prestigious design studio, a dream job that would have launched my own career. I never got an interview. I saw now that Evie had intercepted the request for my portfolio. Instead of sending my professional schematics, she had sent a file containing rough, amateur sketches I had discarded. She was not just sleeping with my husband, I realized, my voice cold in the empty cabin. She clipped my wings so I would never fly away from her, but the final twist came from Miguel just 2 days before I was set to leave. He sent me an audio file recorded from Damon's office late at night. They were drunk. I could hear the clink of glasses. We need to cut the dead weight after the IPO. Damon slurred on the recording. I can't have you hanging around the board. Evie, it looks messy. I'll give you a severance package, but you are out. There was a silence on the tape, followed by Evie's voice. It was not sad. It was venomous. You think you can dump me? She laughed softly. If you try to push me out, Damon, I will tell the world how you stole the code. I will tell them you made me fake the user data. I will burn you down. I sat back in my chair. I had planned to warn Damon that Evie was unstable, to perhaps use that to split them. But this was better. They were two scorpions in a bottle, ready to sting each other to death. I decided to let them. I messaged Harper to adjust our strategy. We would not separate them. We would corner them together. Harper prepared the final blow. He had the cease and desist order and the formal complaint to the Securities and Exchange Commission drafted and signed. We set up a digital trigger. At the press of a button, the legal notifications would hit the inboxes of the NovaSpan board, the SEC regulators, and the event organizers simultaneously. I packed my bags. I left the flannel shirts and jeans in the cabin. I flew back to Chicago and went straight to a boutique on Michigan Avenue. I bought a dress. It was not the soft floral kind Lauren the wife wore. It was a floor-length black gown, sharp and architectural, like a weapon made of silk. I checked into the hotel directly across the street from the venue where the NovaSpan Vision Night was being held. From my window on the 20th floor, I could look down into the ballroom's glass atrium. I could see the staff setting up the champagne towers. I stood in front of the full-length mirror in my hotel room, smoothing the black fabric over my hips. I looked at the woman in the reflection. Her eyes were dry. Her hands were steady. I leaned forward, meeting my own gaze, and rehearsed the only line that mattered. Do you remember when you said I had nothing? I whispered to the glass, imagining Damon's face. Today, we are going to check the math on that. The grand ballroom of the Conrad Chicago had been transformed into a temple of ego. Cobalt blue lights, the signature color of NovaSpan, washed over the 500 guests, turning their champagne flutes into glowing sapphires. Huge LED screens wrapped around the walls, projecting towering images of binary code and DNA helixes. It smelled of expensive cologne, roasted duck, and the electric hum of greed. I watched from the shadows of the entrance archway as Damon worked the room. He looked every inch the tech visionary in a midnight blue tuxedo, his smile practiced and dazzling. Beside him, Evie glittered in a sequined silver gown that was cut low enough to be a statement. They moved together with a synchronicity that went far beyond professional colleagues, her hand lingering on his lower back, his body leaning into hers as they laughed with a senator from Illinois. But the cracks were already starting to show. At least for Evie. 10 minutes earlier, backstage in the green room, my plan had made its first contact. Evie had slipped away to check her makeup. I knew this because Miguel had hacked the security feed. She picked up her phone and saw a notification from an unknown sender. The subject line was simple. He is going to dump you after the IPO. She had tapped the attached audio file. It was the recording of Damon drunkenly admitting she was disposable. On the security feed, I saw her face go slack. Her perfect posture collapsed. She looked up at the mirror, her eyes wide with a sudden, terrifying realization that she was not the queen of the castle, but just another tenant waiting to be evicted. She had composed herself and walked back out, but her smile was now brittle, her eyes darting around the room with paranoia. It was time for my entrance. I walked up to the check-in desk, flanked by Marcus, the senior partner from the investment fund. The young woman with the iPad looked up, her smile faltering when she did not see my name on the general guest list. "Name, please?" she asked. "Lauren Price," I said, my voice clear and projecting just enough for the people behind me to hear. "I believe I am listed under the VIP section." My designation is co-creator of early Novaspan prototype. The woman blinked, scrolling frantically. I have a Lauren Price, but the title? Surely that is a mistake. It is no mistake, Marcus interjected smoothly. We are here to ensure the accuracy of tonight's presentation. We swept past her before she could protest. As we moved into the main crowd, the murmurs began. It started as a ripple and turned into a wave. I saw heads turn. Engineers I had hired 3 years ago nudged each other, pointing. Is that Lauren? I heard a former project manager whisper. I thought she had a breakdown. Why is she listed as a founder? Look at her, another voice murmured. She doesn't look broken to me. Damon sensed the shift in the room before he saw me. The crowd parted as I walked toward the center of the floor. When his eyes finally locked onto mine, his face went the color of ash. For a second, the CEO mask slipped, revealing the terrified fraud underneath. But he was a professional. He swallowed hard, forced a tight smile onto his face, and walked toward me, leaving Evie stranded by the bar. Lauren, he said as he reached me, his voice pitching slightly higher than normal. He extended a hand, but I did not take it. I didn't expect to see you here. I thought you were resting in Colorado. You look, well, I am well. Damon, I replied, keeping my hands at my sides. The mountain air clarifies things. It helps you see what is actually yours. He stepped closer, invading my personal space, dropping his voice to a hiss so the investors nearby could not hear. What are you doing here? Lauren, this is a business event. You are going to embarrass yourself. Let's go to the private suite upstairs and talk. I can explain everything. I looked him dead in the eye. I saw the sweat beading on his upper lip. No, Damon, I said, loud enough for the circle of onlookers to catch every syllable. We will talk, but on stage is better. Damon recoiled as if I had slapped him. Across the room, I saw Evie watching us. She saw Marcus standing protectively behind me, recognized him as a heavy-hitting investor, and I saw the blood drain from her face. She realized in that second that the ground was shifting, that I had allies she could not manipulate. Suddenly, the lights dimmed. The dramatic orchestral music swelled, signaling the start of the main event. Ladies and gentlemen, the master of ceremonies announced, his voice booming over the speakers. Please welcome the visionary, the architect of our future, Mr. Damon Carter. The spotlight swung through the darkness, blindingly white, and pinned Damon to the floor. He looked at me one last time, desperation in his eyes, before turning to walk toward the stage. He thought he could still salvage this. He thought if he just got to the microphone, he could charm his way out. He was wrong. At that exact moment, 2,000 miles away in a small office in Maple Ridge, Elias Harper pressed the enter key on his laptop. A barrage of high-priority emails blasted into the inboxes of the Securities and Exchange Commission, the event organizers, and every single member of the Novaspan Board of Directors. The subject line read, Urgent, Cease and Desist, Order and Evidence of Securities Fraud. Damon stepped onto the stage, bathing in the applause, unaware that he was walking into his own execution. Damon stood at the podium, bathed in the white spotlight, looking like a god of the modern age. Behind him, the massive LED screen cycled through sepia-toned photos of our old apartment, carefully edited to remove me from the frame. He pressed a button on the clicker, bringing up an image of a garage that we never actually worked in, but which fit the narrative better. I remember the nights I spent coding by candlelight, Damon said, his voice thick with rehearsed emotion. I had nothing but a vision, no money, no connections, just the belief that I could change the world of medicine. I built this algorithm from scratch, line by line, bleeding for this company, The crowd was mesmerized. I stood at the edge of the stage, my heart hammering a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I waited for him to reach the crescendo. And now, Damon smiled, spreading his arms wide. Our proprietary algorithm, developed exclusively by the Novaspan team, is ready to save millions of lives. That was the cue. Behind him, the screen flickered violently. The image of the fake garage dissolved into static. A collective gasp rippled through the ballroom as a new image stabilized on the 40-foot display. It was not a marketing slide. It was a high-resolution scan of a United States Patent Office certificate. The text was magnified, sharp and undeniable predictive health modeling engine. Inventor Lauren Nora Price. Damon turned around, confused by the sudden shift in light. He tapped the clicker frantically. "We seem to be having a technical difficulty." He laughed nervously, signaling to the sound booth. "Cut the feed. Cut it now." But the screen did not go black. Instead, a sound like a swarm of angry hornets filled the room. It was the vibration of 300 phones buzzing simultaneously on tables and in pockets. Every board member, every investor, and every journalist in the room looked down at their screens. Marcus, the representative from the investment fund, stepped out of the shadows. He did not ask for permission. He walked straight up the stairs to the stage, grabbed the microphone from a stand, and his voice boomed over the confused murmurs. "I apologize for the interruption," Marcus said, his tone grave. "But my firm has just received documentation proving that the core intellectual property of Novaspan Dynamics is not owned by the company. It belongs to Mrs. Lauren Price. Furthermore, we have been notified that the Securities and Exchange Commission has opened a preliminary investigation into securities fraud regarding the concealment of this ownership." The silence that followed was absolute. Then, a board member in the front row, a man named Sterling who had backed Damon from the start, turned to the person next to him. He thought he was whispering, but in the dead quiet, his lavalier microphone picked up every word. "Why is she the inventor?" "But she is not on the capitalization table." The question echoed through the speakers, hanging in the air like a guillotine blade. Damon stood frozen, his face draining of all color, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Evie, watching her future disintegrate from the sidelines, made a desperate calculation. She rushed up the stairs, her silver dress shimmering under the lights, and grabbed Damon's arm. She looked out at the crowd, tears already welling in her eyes, trying to play the peacemaker. "Please," she cried out, her voice trembling. "This is just a misunderstanding. Lauren is family to us. We love her. We would never hurt her. Lauren, please, tell them we are family." I stepped into the light. I did not yell. I walked to the center of the stage, looked at the woman I had shared a dorm room with, and spoke into the microphone with a voice that could freeze water. "Family doesn't sleep with your husband. Evie." The room erupted. The shock was physical. People actually recoiled in their seats. I did not let the momentum die. I turned to the audience, keeping my explanation surgical. "For 22 years, she was my sister." I said, looking at the investors. "For 10 years. He was my husband. While I built the code that brought you here tonight, they were planning a divorce to strip me of my equity. They intended to leave me with nothing while they sold my invention to you for hundreds of millions." "She is lying," Damon screamed, finally snapping out of his shock. He pointed a shaking finger at me. "This is extortion. She wants a payout before the IPO." She is mentally unstable, as if in answer to his accusation. The screen behind him flashed again. The patent disappeared, replaced by a screenshot of an email sent from Damon's private account to his lawyer. The font was huge, inescapable. "We need to ensure Lauren has no rights left on paper so she cannot claim a share later. Use her for the technical transition, then dump her." Damon stared at his own words, looming over him like a judgment. The flashbulbs from the press pit started going off like lightning. a blinding storm of exposure. In the tech booth above the ballroom, a young technician frantically tapped his headset, his face pale as he spoke to the stage manager. "Sir?" "I can't stop it!" the technician stammered, his voice leaking into the stage monitors. "There is another file queuing up. It is an audio file. It is loading now." The audio file tore through the stunned silence of the ballroom like a physical blow. It was unmistakably Damon, his voice slurring with arrogance and alcohol, amplified by the $1 million sound system he had paid for. "She is just a free launch pad." The recording of Damon sneered, his laugh echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "Once the initial public offering clears and the cash hits the offshore accounts, I am pushing Evie to a corner office where she can't touch anything. She thinks she is a partner, but she is delusional. Anyone can replace her." Then came Evie's voice on the tape, cold and sharp as a razor. "You try to dump me, Damon, and I will leak the real spreadsheets. I will tell the Wall Street Journal that you ordered the engineering team to fake the user growth data and that you hid the real intellectual property owner from the prospectus." The ballroom descended into absolute chaos. I watched as investors frantically dialed their lawyers, shouting over the noise. A few people near the front knocked over their chairs in their haste to distance themselves from the stage. The master of ceremonies tried to stammer an apology, but he was interrupted by 3 men in dark suits walking purposefully down the center aisle. One of them stepped onto the stage and flashed a badge. It was a representative from the Securities and Exchange Commission. He did not shout. He simply handed a thick packet of papers to a paralyzed Damon. "Mr. Carter," the agent said, his voice carrying over the microphone he took from Damon's limp hand. "This is a federal subpoena. The initial public offering of Novaspan is officially suspended pending a criminal investigation into securities fraud and embezzlement." The Novaspan board of directors huddled in a frantic circle near the tech booth. After less than 60 seconds, the chairman, Mr. Sterling, grabbed a headset and marched to the podium, pushing Damon aside. "Effective immediately," Sterling announced, his face pale with fury. "Damon Carter is removed as Chief Executive Officer. Evelyn Brooks is placed on unpaid leave subject to an internal audit. All company access for both individuals is terminated now." Evie let out a strangled cry. The reality of her destruction hit her all at once. She grabbed Damon's lapels, shaking him violently. "You promised," she screamed, her composure shattering completely. "You promised you would take care of me when Damon tried to shove her away." She spun toward the press pit, her eyes wide with panic. "He made me do it," she yelled at the cameras, pointing an accusing finger at the man she had kissed an hour ago. "He pressured me. He told me to adjust the numbers or he would fire me." Damon, cornered and vicious, bared his teeth. "You are a liar," he shouted back, his voice cracking. "She has been skimming from the Employee Welfare Fund for her personal events for 2 years. She sold me out to save her own skin." I stood perfectly still in the center of the storm, watching them tear each other apart. They were exposing every crime, every lie, every betrayal, doing the prosecutor's work for him. When they finally ran out of breath, I stepped forward. Elias Harper placed a single document on the podium in front of Damon. I looked at the board members, then at Damon. "If you want Novaspan to survive the week without being liquidated," I said calmly, "you will accept my offer. I am the sole owner of the technology this company runs on. I can shut it down tonight." Damon stared at the paper. "It was a transfer agreement. The terms are simple," I continued. "You transfer your entire preferred stock portfolio to the Alice and Nora Legacy Fund. I retain veto power over all future use of my intellectual property. In exchange, I will grant a conditional license to the company to keep the servers running, so the patients rely on the tech do not suffer and the employees do not lose their jobs, but you leave with nothing." Damon looked at the agent from the SEC, then at the document. He knew that if he signed, he lost his fortune. If he did not sign, he faced a federal prison sentence that would likely be double the length without my cooperation. His hand shook violently as he took the pen. He was weeping now, silent, ugly tears of a narcissist who had lost his reflection. He pressed the pen to the paper and signed his name, the ink smearing slightly as his hand trembled. When he finished, he looked up at me. His eyes were red, pleading, desperate to find the woman who had once worshipped him. "Lauren," he whispered, his voice catching in his throat. "I love you. I was wrong. We can start over. Please." I looked him straight in the eyes, feeling absolutely nothing but the cool relief of a burden lifted. "You whispered that to the wrong speakerphone," I said softly. I turned my back on him. I walked down the stairs of the stage, the flashbulbs exploding around me like fireworks. I walked past Evie, who was sobbing into her hands, and past the investors who were now looking at me with fear and respect. I pushed open the heavy double doors of the hotel and stepped out into the Chicago night. The air was cold and clean. I was no longer a wife. I was no longer a victim. I was the author of my own life, and the ink was finally permanent. Thank you so much for listening to my story. Please comment below and tell me where you are listening from. I would love to hear your thoughts on how I handled Damon and Evie. Make sure to subscribe to Lily Revenge Stories, like this video, and smash that hype button so more people can hear the truth.